The rain fell in sharp sheets on the boarding house's tin roof, and each drop seemed to echo the sentence Ilara had carried in her chest since birth: "You are not enough." Sitting on the edge of the narrow bed, knees drawn up to her chest, she watched the cracks in the ceiling while the voices of the council meeting still resonated in her mind. A common human, they said, no magic, no lineage, no worth. The words had been uttered with the cruel naturalness of someone describing the weather, as if her existence were just an unfortunate fact to be tolerated. 23 years of life, and Ilara still hadn't found a place where she fit. Not among the common humans, who looked at her with suspicion for living on the border between the realms. Not among the magical beings, who treated her like a stain on their shimmering world. She was the girl who cleaned the halls after the balls, who served wine while others danced, who existed on the fringes of all stories, without ever being the protagonist of any. The realm of Vespera was governed by hierarchies as rigid as the mountains that surrounded it. At the top, the High Fae, with their immortal beauty and ancestral magic. Below them, the hybrids, the shapeshifters, the sorcerers of lesser lineage. And at the bottom, crushed under the weight of centuries of contempt, the humans without magic, especially the women, considered too fragile to survive, too insignificant to matter. Ilara knew her place well. Each morning, as she crossed the stone streets of the city of Noctis, she felt the looks of disdain, heard the whispers that followed her like shadows. "Poor thing," the ladies of the court said when she passed. "What a waste of space," the guards muttered. Her only crime was existing without the shimmer this world demanded. The night before, during the banquet in honor of the winter solstice, Ilara had been serving wine to the nobles when Lord Caius, a high fae with platinum hair, deliberately knocked his goblet onto her dress. "Careful, creature," he said, smiling as the red liquid ran down the cheap fabric. The whole room laughed. No one moved to help her. No one ever moved. She cleaned the floor on her knees while the laughter echoed, swallowing the tears because crying would only confirm what everyone already thought, that she was weak, pathetic, unworthy even of pity. But what no one knew, what Ilara barely dared to admit to herself, was that in the depths of her chest, where pain and humiliation accumulated like ashes, something was beginning to burn. A tiny but persistent ember, the anger of someone who had been trampled so many times that she had begun to forget what it was like to stand. And perhaps, just perhaps, the spark of something more dangerous, hope. It was 3 days after the banquet that the rumors began to spread through the city like wildfire. The Demon King was returning. Kael Shadowscar, the Alpha of the Abyssals, the conqueror of the Shadowlands, the man, if he could even be called that, who had decimated entire armies with a wave of his hand. They said he hated women with an intensity bordering on madness, that his fortress in the Black Mountains was a tomb for any female who dared to cross his path. They whispered about the curse he carried, about the heart frozen in ancient ice, about the darkness that consumed him from within. There were stories, so many stories, about Kael. That he had killed his own mother at birth, that his bride had betrayed him with his brother, leading him to slaughter both in a single bloody night, that a sorceress had cursed him to never know love, only hatred. No one knew for sure what the truth was, but everyone agreed on one point. Kael Shadowscar was the most dangerous being who had ever breathed, and his arrival in Vespera meant only one thing: someone would suffer. Ilara should have felt fear when she learned that she would be assigned to serve in the west wing of the palace, exactly where the Demon King would be staying. She should have begged for another position, fled, done anything. But she did none of that. Because deep down, a part of her, the tired, hurt, desperate part, thought, what else could he take from me that this world hasn't already taken? The first time Alara saw Kale Shadowscar was through a crack in the door of the reception hall. He had his back to her, but even so, his presence dominated the space like a storm trapped in human form. Tall, absurdly tall, easily surpassing 6.5 feet, with broad shoulders covered by a black cloak that seemed to absorb the light around him. His hair was the color of midnight, falling in waves to his shoulders, and when he turned slightly, Elara could glimpse the angular profile, the sharp jawline, the scars that cut across his temple like lightning captured on skin. But it was his eyes that paralyzed her. Even from a distance, she could feel the weight of that gaze. Si, segura com minhas preferências. Houve uma pausa tensa, interrompida apenas pelo crepitar do fogo na lareira. Então, Caius riu, som forçado e desconfortável. Claro, Majestade, minhas desculpas. Apenas digo que, bem, elas são problemáticas. Distrações. Você não precisa disso, não agora. Talvez eu precise exatamente disso, Kael respondeu, o tom seco como poeira. Talvez, após séculos de guerra e traição, eu precise de uma distração, uma curiosidade, algo diferente. Elara sentiu um arrepio subir por sua espinha. Ele estava falando dela? Impossível. Ela era uma insignificância, uma serva humana em um mundo de seres poderosos. No entanto, as palavras pairavam no ar, pesadas com um significado tácito. Se você diz, Majestade, Caius respondeu cautelosamente, mas esteja avisado, brincar com fogo pode acabar queimando você. Kael não respondeu. E Elara, sufocando sobre o peso daquelas palavras, finalmente se afastou, as toalhas em seus braços tremendo tanto que quase caíram. Ela precisava sair dali. Precisava se esconder. Precisava descobrir como escapar da teia que parecia estar se fechando ao seu redor. Now, translate the block 2 of 10 and adapt it culturally. Glowed like dying embers, as old as time itself, and utterly devoid of anything resembling humanity. You, a cutting voice sliced through her trance. It was Headmistress Corvina, a high fae woman whose beauty was surpassed only by her cruelty. The Demon King requires wine. Go, now. Elara's heart leapt into her throat. I'm not supposed to. Go, Corvina hissed, shoving her forward with enough force to make her stumble. And don't keep him waiting. Do you know what he did to the last maid who displeased him? They say all they found were ashes. With trembling hands, Elara snatched up the silver tray with the dragon blood wine and walked down the corridor. Each step felt like it was leading her closer to an execution. When she pushed open the door to the private parlor where Kale had taken residence, the air shifted. It grew denser, charged with something ancient and dangerous, like the moment before a lightning strike. He stood by the window, watching the city illuminated by the twilight. He didn't turn as she entered. "Leave it there," he said, and his voice was like ground glass over velvet, smooth and cutting at the same time. Elara placed the tray on the table with a clink of silver against wood, her fingers slipping. "Yes, my lord," she whispered, curtsying to leave. "Wait." The word froze her in place. Slowly, terrifyingly slowly, Kale turned. And for the first time, Elara saw his face in its entirety. He was devastating. Not beautiful in the way the High Fae were beautiful, with their ethereal, unreal perfection. Kale's beauty was brutal, violent, constructed of hard lines and deep shadows. The scars didn't detract from his appearance, they intensified it, each mark telling a story of violence survived and vengeance exacted. His red eyes swept over her from head to toe, an assessment so cold and impersonal that Ilara felt like an insect under a magnifying glass. "You're human," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Yes, my lord." "And a woman." The tone carried so much disdain that Ilara felt like she'd been slapped. "Yes." Kale took a step toward her, and every muscle in Ilara's body screamed to flee. But she forced herself to remain still, lifting her chin in a flash of defiance that surprised even herself. His eyes narrowed. "Interesting," he murmured, so low she could barely hear it. "You're not trembling." "I am trembling," Ilara blurted out before she could stop herself, and then her eyes widened, shocked by her own audacity. "I'm just doing it on the inside." For a moment, a single moment suspended in time, something flickered across Kale's face. Surprise, perhaps, or curiosity. Then it vanished, replaced by the mask of icy indifference. "Leave," he said, turning back to the window, "and don't return." Ilara didn't need to be told twice. She practically ran out, her heart pounding so loud it drowned out every other sound. Only when she was safe in her tiny room, with the door locked and her back against the wood, did she allow her knees to give way. She had survived. Somehow, impossibly, inexplicably, she had survived an encounter with the Demon King. But as the adrenaline faded, another sensation lingered. Strange, unsettling, impossible to name. The way he had looked at her, not with the casual contempt she knew so well, but with attention, as if for a split second she had been seen, really seen, and that, more than anything, should have frightened Ilara to the bone. The following days dragged by with the slowness of molasses in winter. Ilara was reassigned to the East Wing, far from anywhere Kale might cross her path, and she should have felt relieved. But instead, there was a restlessness crawling beneath her skin, a thought that returned again and again. Why did he let me go? The stories said Kale didn't tolerate the presence of women, that he despised them with an intensity that transcended mere male chauvinism and became something bordering on visceral revulsion. So why had he simply dismissed her instead of what? She didn't even know what she expected. She just knew that the interaction had unsettled her in ways she couldn't articulate. On the 5th night after that encounter, Ilara was carrying clean towels through the deserted corridors when she heard voices coming from the library. One of them, deep, gravelly, unmistakable, belonged to Kale. The other belonged to Lord Caius, the same one who had humiliated her at the banquet. "Females are all the same," Caius was saying, his voice slurred with wine and arrogance. "Manipulative, liars, only good for one thing. You understand that better than anyone, Your Majesty." Ilara should have kept walking. She should have ignored it. But something made her stop, pressing herself against the wall beside the slightly open door. "Mind your words, Caius." Kale's voice was low, dangerous. "You mistake my past with my preferences." There was a tense pause, broken only by the crackling of the fire in the hearth. Then Caius laughed, a forced, uncomfortable sound. "Of course, Majesty. My apologies. I just mean, well, they're troublesome. Distractions. You don't need that. Not now." "Perhaps I need exactly that," Kale replied, his tone as dry as dust. "Perhaps after centuries of war and betrayal, I need a distraction, a curiosity, something different." Ilara felt a chill run down her spine. Was he talking about her? Impossible. She was an insignificance, a human servant in a world of powerful beings. Yet the words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. "If you say so, Majesty," Caius responded cautiously. "But be warned, playing with fire can get you burned." Kale didn't reply, and Ilara, suffocating under the weight of those words, finally moved away, the towels in her arms trembling so much they nearly fell. She needed to get out of there. She needed to hide. She needed to figure out how to escape the web that seemed to be closing in around her. It comes with a philosophy. But surely, after what she did to you, enough. The roar was so sudden and violent that Ilara felt it reverberate in her bones. There was the sound of shattering glass, hurried footsteps, a door slamming. Silence. When Ilara finally dared to peek through the crack, Caius was gone. Kale was alone, slumped in an armchair by the dying fire, his head in his hands. And for the first time since she'd seen him, he didn't look like a king. He looked like an exhausted, broken man, carrying a weight that threatened to crush him. Without thinking, Ilara heard herself knocking softly on the door. Kale looked up so fast she almost fled, his red eyes capturing her with laser intensity. "You," he said, and there was something in his voice, surprise mixed with something darker. "I told you not to come back." "I didn't come back," Ilara replied, stepping inside with a courage she didn't know she possessed. "I never left. I work in this palace. Sometimes our paths will cross." His eyes narrowed. "You're either incredibly foolish or incredibly brave." "Maybe both." She placed the towels on the nearby table, her movements deliberately calm. "Or maybe just too tired to be afraid." "Everyone should afraid of me." "Probably," Ilara agreed. And then, in that madness that sometimes possessed the desperate, added, "But you don't scare me any more than the rest of this world already does." Kale rose in a single fluid motion, and suddenly he was too close, his presence engulfing her like a tide. "You know nothing about me," he hissed. "No," Ilara lifted her chin, forcing herself to meet those impossible eyes. "But I know what I heard. Caius talking about women like we're objects, and you corrected him." Something flickered in those red eyes. "Don't make me out to be a hero, little mortal. I simply hate hypocrisy." "So you don't hate women?" The question hung between them, heavy as lead. Kale studied her for a long moment, and Ilara could have sworn she saw a war raging behind those eyes. Old memories battling with the present, hatred intertwined with something that might have been pain. "I hate betrayal," he finally said, his voice so low it was almost a whisper. "I hate manipulation. I hate the weakness that allows others to destroy us." He took a step back, putting distance between them. "And I hate what I've become." The words stole the air from Ilara's lungs. Because she knew that hate. She knew it intimately. It was the same hate that consumed her every time she looked in the mirror and saw only the girl the world despised. "Then we're not so different," she said softly. Kale laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "We are worlds apart, little mortal." "My name is Ilara." "I didn't ask for your name." "No," she turned to leave, pausing at the door to look back at him over her shoulder. "But now you have it anyway. Good night, Your Majesty." She left before he could respond, her heart thundering, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the towels. What on earth had she just done? She had spoken to the Demon King as if he were equal, as if her words mattered, as if she mattered, and most terrifying of all, he had responded, not with violence or contempt, but with something surprisingly close to honesty. Ilara didn't sleep that night. She lay in the darkness, replaying every word, every look, every second of that impossible encounter. And when she finally drifted into a restless sleep, she dreamed of red eyes and a darkness that, for the first time in her life, didn't seem frightening. It felt almost inviting. The world has curious ways of pushing people together, sometimes through fate, sometimes through coincidence, and sometimes through a fire that devours the east wing of the palace on a moonless night. Ilara woke to screams. Smoke was pouring under her door, thick and black, choking her before she could even get out of bed. Her fingers fumbled on the latch, her mind clouded with panic. The hallway was an inferno, flames licking at the walls, people running, the heat so intense it burned her lungs with every breath. She stumbled forward, not knowing where to go, the world reduced to an orange and red nightmare. Then something fell, a beam, heavy and ablaze, directly towards her. Ilara didn't even have time to scream. She just closed her eyes and waited for the impact. It never came. When she opened her eyes, Kale was there. He held the beam with one hand, as if it weighed nothing, his red eyes glowing through the smoke like lanterns in the fog. Without a word, he scooped her up into his arms and ran. The world blurred past. Ilara clung to his chest, feeling the muscles move beneath her hands, the heat of his body a strange contrast to the inferno around them. Only when he set her down on the grass, gently, so gently it contradicted everything Ilara knew about him, did she realize she was crying. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you save me?" Kale stood motionless, his expression unreadable. Soot smudged his face, ashes clung to his hair, and there was a burn on his forearm that he completely ignored. "I don't know," he admitted, and there was something in his voice, confusion, maybe even fear. "I should have left you there. It would be easier." Easier? Easier than this, he gestured vaguely between them, as if there was something visible in the air. Easier than starting to care. The words stole Ilara's breath more efficiently than any smoke could. You care?" "No," Kale said quickly, too quickly. "No, I can't. I won't." And then he turned away, disappearing into the night like the shadow they said he was, leaving Ilara alone on the grass with ash falling around her like dirty snow, and a heart beating with a hope so dangerous it should have terrified her. But it didn't, because for the first time in her life, someone had chosen to save her, and not just anyone, him, the man who supposedly hated everything she stood for, the Shadow King who couldn't even admit he cared, but who had run into the flames anyway. Ilara wrapped her arms around herself and laughed, a broken, hysterical, wonderful sound. The world still hated her, the hierarchy still crushed her, but for a moment, just an impossible moment, she had mattered, and that changed everything. The weeks that followed were a study in contradictions. Officially, Kyle Shadowbrand remained the Shadow King, cold, distant, feared by all who crossed his path. He attended councils where decisions about war and trade were made as easily as others decided on dinner. He walked the halls with an aura of power so absolute that even the High Fae bowed in his presence. There was nothing about him that suggested humanity, let alone kindness. Except that, 3 days after the fire, Ilara found a book on her windowsill. ancient poetry, written in a language she was only beginning to learn. No note, no signature, but she knew. 5 days later, it was a shawl, soft wool, dyed deep blue, thick enough to ward off the biting chill of the coming winter. Again, no message. A week later, when she fell ill, just a cold, but debilitating for someone without healing magic, a vial of medicine appeared on her bedside table. The kind of medicine that cost more than she would earn in a year. And slowly, so slowly that Alara couldn't pinpoint when it started, the Shadow King began to appear where she was. In the library, where he sat in silence while she read. In the winter garden, where he examined plants with an intensity that suggested he was more aware of her presence than the flora. In the small courtyard behind the kitchens, where Alara sometimes went to breathe, and where Kale inexplicably appeared to watch the sunset. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. There was something in each other's presence that became enough, a stillness that neither had known before. One day, as snow began to fall softly on the winter garden, Elara finally broke the silence. "Why do you give me these things?" she asked, holding up the book she was reading, another unsigned gift. Kale didn't look at her, his eyes fixed on the ice-covered glass panes. "You're fragile," he said simply. "Human, unprotected in this world. Someone should take care of you." "But why you?" Finally he turned, and what Elara saw in his eyes made her catch her breath, something wild and frightened, like a cornered animal. "Because I can't stop," he admitted, the words wrenched from him like a confession. "Because I wake up thinking about whether you've eaten. Because I walk the halls hoping to see you. Because for the first time in decades, this ice around me is melting, and it terrifies me more than any battle I've ever faced." Elara stood up, her heart a tempest. "Kale, don't." He held up a hand, stepping back. "Don't say anything. I shouldn't have said anything. This is madness." "Is it?" "Yes," his roar echoed through the glass space. "You don't understand what I am, what I've done, the things I've lived through, the choices I've made. I'm not good, Elara. I never have been, I never will be." She took a step toward him, then another, approaching him as she would approach something wounded. "I don't need you to be good," she said softly. "I need you to be real. I'm a monster. Everyone in this world has told me I'm useless, defective, unworthy of existence. But you see me. So maybe," she reached out, stopping just inches from his chest, "maybe we're both the things the world says we are, and maybe it doesn't matter." Kale's hand trembled as he raised it, his fingers hovering over hers without touching. "If I touch you," he whispered, his voice so raw it hurt to hear, "I won't be able to stop. If I let this happen, I'll want to keep you. And keeping you means destroying you, because everything I touch turns to ash. Then let me burn." Elara closed the distance, her fingers finally finding his. The touch was electric. Their fingers intertwined, and Kale sucked in air as if he'd been struck. For a long moment, they just stood there, hands joined, breaths synced, two lonely souls finding refuge in each other. Then Kale pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with an intensity that bordered on desperation, his face buried in her hair. "My little love," he murmured against her temple, the words so low Elara could barely hear them. "My impossible, stubborn, brave little mortal, what have you done to me?" Elara squeezed him back, feeling his heart racing against hers. "Only what you've done to me." They stayed like that until the snow covered the world in white, and silence was the only language they needed to speak. The winter months passed like a fever dream. Kale and Alara existed in a fragile bubble, stealing moments where they could. Whispered conversations in the library late at night, walks through the pine grove beyond the palace, entire afternoons where he taught her about the history of his kingdom and she taught him about hope. He told her about his childhood, raised in violence, forged in war, betrayed by everyone who had sworn to love him, about the bride he had loved with utter devotion, only to find her in bed with his younger brother, about the massacre that had followed, the curse a dying sorceress had cast upon him, that he would never know peace, that his heart would be ice until a woman loved him for who he truly was. And no one can love a monster, he said, tracing distracted patterns on the back of Alara's hand. They were on the highest overlook of the palace, watching the stars. So I stopped trying to be anything else. You're not a monster. Alara turned to face him, her eyes burning with conviction. You were hurt, betrayed, turned into a weapon by people who should have protected you, but that doesn't define you. Doesn't it? His laugh was bitter. I've killed thousands, Alara, destroyed cities, done things that would give you nightmares. In war, in self-preservation, but here, now, with me, you're gentle, you're careful, you see me in a way that no one else does. His eyes searched hers, vulnerable in a way that broke her heart. How can I be worthy of you when I'm made of darkness? And I'm made of insignificance. She placed her hand on his cheek, feeling him lean into the touch. But together, maybe we're something whole. He kissed her then, finally, inevitably. His lips met hers with a reverence that belied his reputation, as if she were something sacred, something to be protected. The kiss was both gentle and devastating, filled with years of loneliness finally finding their end. When they broke apart, they were both trembling. You're my undoing, Kale whispered against her lips. And you're my salvation, she replied, and kissed him again. But the world wouldn't let them be happy. The world never did. The rumors started as all rumors do, in whispers, in glances, in snide smirks. The Demon King and the human servant girl. The joke practically wrote itself. Lord Caius, still smarting from being reprimanded, was the first to spread the venom. He keeps her as a pet, he said during a dinner party, loud enough to be overheard. Something to warm his bed until he tires of her. Then he'll discard her like everything else. The words reached Alara through the maids, each one adding their own twist to the tale. They said she had bewitched Kale, that she used cheap tricks to hold his attention, that she was just another manipulator, like the one who had betrayed him before. And slowly, so slowly, that Kale didn't notice until it was too late, Alara began to pull away. The doubts she had kept at bay began to whisper. He'll tire of you. He'll realize you're nothing. He'll find someone better, stronger, more beautiful, more worthy. Every scornful glance from the ladies of the court, every murmur in the hallways, every reminder of her own insignificance piled up until the weight was unbearable. One night, when Kyle found her in the library, she could barely look at him. "What's wrong?" he asked, sitting beside her, his concern palpable. "Nothing," she lied. "Alara." He turned her face to him, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Talk to me." "They're right." The words came out like a confession. "All of them. I'm not enough for you. I'm just a human, Kyle. No magic, no power, nothing to justify your attention. Eventually, you'll realize and stop. His voice was rough, almost angry. Stop now. Do you think I care about magic? About power? About any damn thing those people think is important? But you should. You're a king. And you are my heart. He pulled her close, his hands framing her face. Do you think I don't know what they say? Think I don't hear the whispers? But they don't know us. They don't know what it means to be so broken you've forgotten how to breathe without pain. They don't know the miracle of finding someone who sees through the darkness. His lips brushed her forehead, his eyes closing. You're not enough, little mortal. You are everything. And Alara believed him. In that moment, in that sacred space between them, she believed. But belief is fragile when the whole world conspires to break it. It was Lord Caldwell who finally forced the separation. He appeared before the council with a formal complaint that Alara's presence was influencing Kyle in dangerous ways, that he was becoming softer, less willing to make hard decisions, that the human was a weakness their enemies could exploit. Send her away, Caldwell demanded, or we will do it for you. The silence that followed was absolute. All eyes turned to Kyle, waiting to see if the Demon King would choose power over love, reputation over heart. And Kyle, sitting on his throne with a face of stone, said no. The room exploded, nobles shouting, guards positioning themselves, chaos erupting. But Kyle simply stood, his voice cutting through the tumult like a blade. Anyone who touches Alara answers to me personally. And I guarantee, his red eyes swept the room, cold as death, none of you would survive. But victories like that come with prices. That night, Ilara found a note under her door. Just 2 lines in elegant script. You will destroy him. If you truly love him, leave before it's too late. No signature, no need for one. And Alara, who had spent her entire life being destroyed by the world, couldn't bear the thought of destroying the only person who had made her feel whole. So she did the only thing that seemed right. She fled. Ilara left the palace before dawn, with only a small backpack and a shattered heart. She left no note, said no goodbye, because she knew if she saw him, if he asked her to stay, she wouldn't be able to leave. And she needed to leave. For him. Because loving him meant letting him be the king he needed to be, without the complication of a fragile human heart dragging him down. She walked for 3 days, sleeping in forests, buying food from farmers with what little money she had. Each step took her farther from him, and each step hurt like dying. But on the 3rd night, when she reached a small village on the edge of the kingdom, she knew something was wrong. People were scared, locking doors, boarding windows. The Demon King has gone mad, an old woman told her. He's tearing the kingdom apart looking for someone. They say he's destroyed half of Nocturne. They say he won't stop until he finds her. Ilara's heart stopped. No, 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 no. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was supposed to move on. He was supposed to forget her. Who? She whispered, even though she already knew the answer. A girl, a human servant. They say she ran away, and he can't bear it. Ilara turned and ran back the way she had come, her lungs burning, her legs failing. Because if Kyle was destroying himself, if he was letting the darkness consume him, then her escape had been for nothing. She had tried to save him and had only broken him more deeply. She reached Nocturne at dusk the next day and found a city in chaos. Buildings damaged, people hiding, a heavy silence of fear. And at the center of it all, in the palace courtyard, Kael. He was kneeling in the middle of the square, his head bowed, his body shaking. Around him, stones in the ground were cracked, as if something violent had exploded from him. Ilara ran to him, not caring about the guards, about the onlookers, about anything but reaching him. Kael, she dropped to her knees beside him, her hands framing his face. Kael, I'm here, I'm here. His eyes opened, and what she saw in them broke her. Utter devastation, loss so profound it transcended words. You left, he whispered, his voice shattered. You left me. I thought I was saving you. Saving me? His laugh was a horrible sound, torn and bleeding. You are the only thing keeping me human, and you were gone. I was turning into a monster again, Ilara. I could feel it happening. The darkness, the hatred, all coming back because you were the only light and you snuffed it out. I'm so sorry. Tears streamed down her face, hot and unstoppable. I'm so sorry. Everyone said I was destroying you, that I was making you weak. You make me strong. Kael pulled her to him, his arms wrapping around her so tight she could barely breathe. You make me better. Without you, I'm just the monster I've always been. With you, I'm who I was supposed to be. Then I'm not going anywhere, Ilara whispered against his chest. Never again. I promise. Swear to me. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his hands trembling where they cupped her face. Swear you won't leave me. I swear. She placed her hands over his. I swear on everything I am. I'm with you, always. He kissed her then, there in the open courtyard with the world watching, and there was nothing gentle about that kiss. It was desperation and need and love so fierce it consumed. When they broke apart, both were breathless, and Kael pressed his forehead against hers. My love, he whispered, my anchor, my salvation. And you are mine, she replied, the words of vow more binding than any ceremony could be. But Lord Caius, watching from a distance, felt only hatred, because if there was one thing men like him couldn't stand, it was seeing genuine power in places they despised, and he was determined to destroy them, whatever the cost. The conspiracy took 2 weeks to form. Lord Caius gathered allies, nobles who feared Ilara's influence over Kael, High Fae who saw her humanity as contamination, merchants who wanted the old Demon King back, ruthless and cruel. Their plan was simple in its malice, to discredit Ilara publicly, to prove she was a manipulator, to make Kael believe her love was false. They forged letters, correspondence supposedly between Ilara and a rival advisor, plotting to use Kael for political gain. They would bribe witnesses to swear they'd seen her in secret meetings. They spun an entire web of lies so convincing that even the truth would seem suspect. The coup would come during the Grand Council, a gathering of all the leaders of the Allied nations, held once a decade. Hundreds of witnesses, impossible to hide or deny. Perfect. Ilara knew nothing of this. She was busy trying to learn her new role. Because Kael, stubborn and utterly unyielding, had declared that if the court wouldn't accept Ilara as she was, then he would change the court itself. He had appointed her as his advisor, giving her a voice in the affairs of the realm. The move was radical, scandalous, and completely characteristic of the man she loved. "You don't have to do this," she told him one night as they reviewed documents in the private council room. "I do." He looked up from the parchment, his crimson eyes soft in a way that only she saw. "You have a perspective no one else does. You know what it is to be powerless in this world. That is the most important voice in the room." "They hate me." "Let them hate." He reached across the table, lacing his fingers with hers. "As long as I love you, nothing else matters." And Alara, who had spent her entire life wanting to matter, finally believed that she did. It was her mistake, because the belief made her careless, and the carelessness made her vulnerable. The day of the Grand Council dawned clear and cold. The hall was packed. Kings, queens, ambassadors, nobles from 12 different realms. Kale was on his throne, Alara beside him in a smaller but equally ornate chair. A symbol, a declaration. It was Lord Caius who rose during the proceedings, his voice cutting through the diplomatic discussions. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing with false deference, "I request permission to present a matter of urgent national security." Something in his tone made Alara's stomach drop. Kale frowned, but nodded. "Speak." "It concerns the advisor," Caius practically spat the word, "and her true allegiance." The hall went silent. Ilara felt every eye turn to her, and suddenly the room seemed too small, the air too thick. "Explain yourself." Kale's voice was ice. "With pleasure," Caius gestured, and a servant brought forth a stack of letters. These correspondences were intercepted between the advisor and Lord Theron of the Borderlands, detailing a plan to, how shall I put it, seduce your Majesty, gain his trust, and then influence political decisions in favor of Theron's interests. "This is a lie." Ilara stood, her heart thundering. "I never—" "There's more," Caius continued, his voice gaining confidence. "Witnesses who saw her in secret meetings. Proof, a pattern of deceit that—" "Enough!" Kale's roar shook the walls. He stood, power rolling off him in waves that made the nearest nobles recoil. "You dare come here with accusations against her? Against her? Against a manipulator." Caius raised one of the letters. "The evidence is here, in her own handwriting." "It's not my handwriting," Ilara said, but her voice sounded weak even to her own ears. "This is a setup, Kale. You have to believe me." For a horrible, suspended moment, he only looked at her, and Ilara saw the battle raging behind those red eyes, the past warring with the present, the old betrayal echoing through the years. "Show me," he finally said to Caius, his voice dangerously calm. Caius smiled, a triumphant, vile expression, and brought the letters. Kale read them, his expression growing darker with each line. And when he finished, when he raised his eyes to Ilara, there was something there that broke her. Doubt. Just a spark, just a flicker, but it was there. "Kale," she whispered, "you can't believe this. You know me." "I thought I did." His voice was empty, hollow. "Before." "This isn't before. This is me. It's me and you. It's—" "Evidence doesn't lie," Caius interrupted, "and we have witnesses." "Your witnesses lied." A new voice cut through the hall. Everyone turned. A woman stood in the entrance, old, hunched, with eyes that gleamed with ancient power. The Witch of Whispering Woods, one of the oldest and most respected beings in the realm. "I can smell falsehood in this room like a stench." She walked forward, leaning on her staff. "These letters carry illusion magic. The witnesses are under compulsion. And you, she pointed at Caius with a gnarled finger, you reek of guilt and malice. Caius's face paled. You have no authority here, hag. Don't I? She laughed, a dry sound like dead leaves. I saw the birth of this kingdom. I blessed its first king. And I see truth where lesser men see only their own insecurities. She turned to Cale. Your little mortal has not betrayed you, but your own doubts nearly condemned her. Choose, Demon King. Choose the darkness of the past or the light of the present. The silence that followed was absolute. Cale looked at the letters in his hands, then at Alara, then back at Caius. And slowly, very slowly, something changed in his expression. The doubt vanished, replaced by a rage so cold and absolute that Caius took a step back. You tried to make me destroy the only good thing in my life, Cale said, his voice low and deadly. Tried to use my past against me, my fear, my pain. I was protecting the realm. You were protecting your own wounded pride. Cale descended from the throne, each step deliberate. Because you cannot conceive that someone as insignificant as Ilara could have worth, could have a voice, could be loved. He stopped before Caius, looking down at him with the weight of centuries. You are banished. From Vespera, from my lands, from anywhere under my protection. Go, before I change my mind and simply end you. Caius opened his mouth to protest, met Kyle's eyes, and fled. Simply turned and fled, his fine robes billowing behind him like the wings of a defeated raven. The hall erupted in murmurs, nobles whispering, ambassadors exchanging shocked glances. But Kyle ignored them all. He crossed the space to Ilara and dropped to his knees before her. There, in front of kings and queens and the whole world, the Demon King knelt before the little mortal. "Forgive me," he said, his voice breaking. "Forgive me for doubting, even for a second." "Cale, get up." "No." He took her hands, pressing them against his forehead. "Not until you know. Not until you are my choice. No matter the past, no matter the fear, no matter what the world says. You. Always you." Tears streamed down Alara's face as she pulled him to his feet, as she wrapped her arms around him and felt him tremble. "I know," she whispered. "I always knew." And there, in that hall full of witnesses, something ancient finally broke. The curse that held Cale's heart in ice began to crack, fissures of light running through the darkness. The Witch of Whispering Woods smiled, leaning on her staff. "Finally," she murmured, "finally he has chosen." And choosing, Cale discovered, was simple. It was letting go of the hate that had defined him for so long. It was recognizing that strength didn't come from walls built around the heart, but from allowing someone to tear them down. It was loving with desperation and completely, even when it frightened him, especially when it frightened him. "Marry me," he said against Alara's hair, the words so low that only she could hear. Not because the world expects it, not because it's politically advantageous, but because I can't. I can imagine breathing without you by my side. Ilara recoiled just enough to look at him, her eyes shining with tears and joy. "Yes," she said, "yes, yes." And the hall erupted in applause, some genuine, some polite, but all acknowledging that they had witnessed something rare, the birth not only of a union, but of something that transcended politics and power, hope. The wedding was held a month later, on the summer solstice when the sun lingered in the sky until midnight. It wasn't a small affair. Kings and queens from 12 realms came to witness. Merchants and peasants lined the streets, and the palace itself seemed to shimmer with anticipation. But for Alara, as she stood before the mirror in her chambers, wearing a white silk gown embroidered with silver threads, only one thing mattered. He had chosen her. Before the world, before his own past, before all the fears that plagued him, he had chosen her. There was a knock at the door, and then Kale entered, looking devastating in black robes embroidered with patterns of crimson flames. He stopped, his eyes widening. "You are—" He searched for words and failed, simply standing there drinking her in. "You are radiant." "And you are seeing the bride before the ceremony," she pointed out, but she was smiling. "Isn't there some superstition about that?" "Let them have their superstitions." He strode to her, his hands finding her waist. "I have faced enough curses already. One more won't make a difference." "The curse is broken." She placed her hands on his chest, feeling the strong, steady heartbeat beneath her palms. "The sorceress said so. When you chose me, when you chose love over fear, it broke." "No." Kale shook his head, his red eyes soft and filled with something that resembled reverence. "You broke it, simply by existing. By being stubborn enough not to give up on me, you shattered it." "Then we broke it." She rose onto her toes, brushing her lips against his. Together. The ceremony was held in the main courtyard, beneath a canopy of white roses and floating lanterns. The sorceress of Whispering Woods presided, her ancient words echoing through the reverent silence. When it came time for the vows, Kale took Ilara's hands, his hands engulfing hers. "I was ice," he said, his voice carrying through the space. "Ice and darkness and solidified hatred. I had forgotten what it meant to feel, to hope, to love. And then you appeared, small, fragile, so human that you should have been insignificant. But you weren't. You were fire. You were light. You were everything I thought I had lost. You reminded me that strength isn't building walls, it's opening doors. That power isn't ruling through fear, it's ruling with compassion. You taught me how to be human again, and for that, I owe you everything. My heart, my soul, my kingdom, my life. All yours, always." There wasn't a dry eye in the courtyard. Ilara smiled through her tears, squeezing her hands. "I was invisible," she began, her voice trembling but firm. "Invisible and disposable, the kind of person the world steps on without a second thought. I had accepted that this would be my fate, to exist on the fringes, to die without leaving a mark. And then you saw me, really saw me, not despite my humanity, but including it. You gave me a voice when the world silenced me. You gave me choice when the world offered me only obedience. You loved me when I didn't think I deserved love. You transformed my invisibility into visibility, my weakness into strength, my silence into song. And for that, I give you everything I have, my heart, my loyalty, my life, my love, forever." The sorceress smiled, raising her wrinkled hands. "So be it. Sealed in love, forged in defiance, blessed by the very earth, I pronounce you united." And as Kale kissed Ilara, as he pulled her close as if he would never let her go, the sky exploded with light. The ancient magic that had witnessed the vows manifested in cascades of golden light, enveloping them in brilliance. The people cried out in awe, pointing to the sky where the very stars seemed to dance. And Ilara, standing in the circle of Kale's arms with the world celebrating around them, thought, this is belonging. Finally, finally, I belong. The months that followed were the happiest of their lives. Kale ruled with Ilara by his side, her perspective humanizing decisions that might have been brutal, her compassion softening his justice. Together, they reformed laws that had oppressed the non-magical humans, established protection programs for the vulnerable, opened the court to voices that had never been heard before. There was resistance, of course. There always was. But when the Demon King and his mortal queen spoke with one voice, few dared to disagree. And slowly, very slowly, the kingdom began to change. Not overnight, and for the day, not completely, but enough. Enough that, a year after the wedding, when Ilara walked through the streets of Noctis, she didn't only find looks of contempt, she found respect. Even, from some, something akin to affection. "You're changing the world," Kale told her one night, as they stood on the balcony watching the city lit by lanterns. "We're changing the world," she corrected, interlacing her fingers with his, all together. "Are you happy?" The question was hesitant, vulnerable in a way he rarely allowed. Ilara turned to face him, reaching up to trace the scars on his temple, the lines that time and battle had left. "I am home," she said simply. "For the first time in my life, I am home. So yes, I am absurdly, ridiculously, completely happy." Kale pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "My love," he murmured, "my impossible, stubborn, little mortal savior. What would I do without you?" "Lucky for you that you'll never need to find out," she smiled against his chest. And there, under the stars that had witnessed so many farewells and sorrows, they stood together, Demon King and Mortal Queen, ice and fire, darkness and light, not opposites, but complements, not at war, but in harmony. Because sometimes, just sometimes, the world allows those who have been broken to find ways to become whole. And when that happens, when two shattered souls discover that their jagged edges fit perfectly, it is the kind of magic that no sorceress could conjure and no curse could break. It is the kind of magic that only love can create. And it lasts. Oh, how it lasts. Forever and a day after, until the stars fade and time itself forgets to count. They lasted. And for the day, not entirely, but enough. Enough that, a year after the wedding, when Eleanor walked through the streets of Nightfall, she didn't only find looks of scorn, she found respect. Even, from some, something close to affection. "You're changing the world," Kyle told her one night as they stood on the balcony watching the city lit by streetlights. "We're changing the world," she corrected, interlacing her fingers with his. Together. "Are you happy?" The question was hesitant, vulnerable in a way he rarely allowed. Eleanor turned to face him, reaching up to trace the scars on his temple, the lines that time and battle had left. "I'm home," she said simply. "For the first time in my life, I'm home. So yes, I'm absurdly, ridiculously, completely happy." Kyle pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "My love," he murmured, "my impossible, stubborn, little mortal savior. What would I do without you?" "Lucky for you that you'll never need to find out," she smiled against his chest. And there, under the stars that had witnessed so many goodbyes and heartaches, they stood together, Demon King and Mortal Queen, ice and fire, darkness and light, not opposites, but complements, not at war, but in harmony. Because sometimes, just sometimes, The world allows those who have been broken to find ways to become whole. And when that happens, when two shattered souls discover that their jagged edges fit perfectly, it's the kind of magic that no witch could conjure and no curse could break. It's the kind of magic that only love can create. And it lasts. Oh, how it lasts. Forever and a day after, until the stars fade and time itself forgets to count. They lasted.